I have been playing for a while. I've been playing since 2nd edition, and I have played as the Genestealer Cult on the tabletop since their return to 40k after deciding to go underground and hide away for a literal generation. That being the gap between 3rd edition and 6th edition. Their lore was fascinating. The models have a lot of customization and they play very differently to other armies. Alternatively, I could be tough infantry, tough infantry, tough infantry in silver but they call it grey, or very tough infantry. Not forgetting tough infantry with spikes. Of course I'm going to slander the oppressors. And I've made a video explaining, I think, every Genestealer Cult unit, the combos, the way to use it, the optimized tactics, and how to build the models. But you can just choose fun and go with whatever you want. Those videos are in a playlist linked at the end. Part of my point in mentioning these videos is to say, I am not some random commenter making suggestions based on tournament results I've read or what I've seen on the internet. I am the person on the internet. And I get my information from playing with the army in a casual and competitive setting. The other reason to mention the videos is so you know that they are something that exists and that may be useful for you to watch. This video has also taken a while to make, as each unit has been evaluated and with the points changed, our army special rule was modified, and then the Tyranids and Space Marines have had their codexes. All of that I've had to take into account before making recommendations. This is a tier list of Genestealer Cult units, which units you should consider, which units you should really include, and which units, in a competitive game, are best placed in the stands to cheer the others on. Brood Brothers are not included, but I have a video already on some of the best to add in. Again, that's in the playlist at the end. With my Adeptus Sororitas tier list, the other main faction I talk about, I had several units in the no tier and none in the auto include. That's because with the sisters, there isn't a unit that you need to include to win the game. Although regular battle sisters are certainly up there. But that's because it is kind of difficult to win a competitive game with the sisters, regardless of what you take. With exception. Genestealer Cults have been somewhat easier in 10th edition, and as a faction they are no longer played only by mega-brain people who can meticulously calculate everything so that the squishy cultists can overperform compared to what their profile suggests. Now, with the ability to recycle units, the faction is more open to a casual player, and that is all for the good, as long as you roll well. I have had a game where I got no units back, so we do our best. As with any of these, I am expressing opinions on the internet. Don't burn me! This is what I've come to from a long time playing 40k and the many games of 10th edition I have played with these lovely cultists, presented in a visually easy to understand way. So if you think that we're on the same page about everything and you know the Genestealer Cult as well as I do, and I'm sure you will want to skip to the end and think, yep, all is right in the world. But if not everything is perfect, or you want some advice on units without watching a detailed video on the unit, you are in the right place. Ideally in the future I would do a video on each detachment because, hypothetically, Jackal Bike's a C tier, but in the Rusted Claw, vehicle and bike focused detachment that doesn't exist yet, they become A tier. It would be silly to say, oh, in some detachments C, in some detachments A, so B tier? No, detachment-specific tactics have detachment bonuses to specific units. This is for the Ascension Day detachment. Currently, our only detachment. The levels on the tier list are auto-include for units that are very necessary to make the army function in any flavour of list. A is for very good units that you should include. B is for good units, but there are units that do the job better. C tier units work in one style of the army, but are generally not required. So this is a little different to how I rank the Adeptus Sororitas units. And no tier are for the units that look good on the shelf, but not on the battlefield. Already your mind has clicked, yep, I know where one unit is going. The units are not going to be arbitrarily presented in something like alphabetical order. They will come as pairs as best I can of similar units so you can see how one does the job better or differently to another. And I'm going to start with the Acolytes. I know they start with an A, but the reason they're first is because they are the first generation. Aha! That's why. The Acolytes are the unit that does the damage, and there are several ways to run Acolytes. You can have them with a lot of mining weapons to do combat because that damage 3 really upsets Terminators. Or more likely, and what they're points costed for, is to have lots of demo charges. 4 demo charges in a squad of 10, you throw them once per game, it's strength 12, it's high AP, it's okay damage, but you want a lot of them through because you do get a lot of shots. And you get sustained hits when you come up from deep strike, and with a Primus to reroll and with an Achilles Ridge Runner to give bonuses to the AP, and using a perfect ambush so you're not hitting on 5s, you're hitting on 4s, and with another AP, and the ability to appear 3 inches away when you drop those demo charges, a lot of lists in the Ascension Day detachment are focused almost entirely around these being the damage dealers. So I've gone with a picture holding the demo charges because, yeah, that's what you want. They can work as a combat unit, but the detachment stratagems are mainly focused around coming up from reserve and doing a lot of damage immediately, not putting out a lot of close combat damage. So regardless of how you run your list, as an infantry horde, as a mechanized style, as some kind of elite strike force, Acolytes with demo charges are going to have to be part of it. Alternatively, you can have Metamorphs. They are cheaper now than Acolytes. They have versatile combat weapons, so they can hit heavy infantry or light infantry, but they can't have demo charges or mining weapons, which is where I think it's definitely worth it to have the Acolytes instead. What they do get is Scout. You may think, oh, Scout has very limited utility. It sort of does. In Crusade games, however, and some missions that you get like in the White Dwarf, where it's a one-off, there are several things that you can score in the first turn, as in at the very start of the first battle round in your command phase. If you can scout onto an objective, you can score additional points. So having one unit just to do that can be very useful in those games. But if you're playing the more common mission deck from the Leviathan pack with the cards and the secondary objectives, again, Scout can be useful to get close to objectives and do, say, cleanse and things in the first turn, if you draw them. However, we also have a lot of infiltrating units that can do that as well. So I'd put them in C tier. They are not unusable, just Acolytes are way better, and they come from the same box. A Primus and a Nexos are both units that can lead either Acolytes or Metamorphs, as well as Neophytes. Earlier in the edition, it was Nexos all the way, and also Primus all the way. The Primus has had a recent points increase, but both of the abilities of the Primus are very effective. With decoys and misdirection, as long as you have at least one Primus, you can redeploy up to 3 units, including being able to set them up in strategic reserves, even if you already got the maximum number of units in strategic reserves. So this could mean that in smaller games, you start with nothing on the board. Not a great idea. Maybe have some Neophytes on the board just to hold your home objective, but being able to deep strike with everything in a detachment that very much focuses on the deep strike aspect is a very nice tool. Even if you deploy the Primus underground, you still get to use this ability. It's not conditional for being on the table at the start of the game. Though we have had recent guidelines to say, if we have some infiltrating units, we can't redeploy them and still be infiltrating with them. It's a whole thing about phases, the phase that it happens in. We're no longer in the deployment phase, so you can't use the infiltrate rule, which is deployment phase specific. But aside from that, that's still very good, being able to redeploy units. And the other one is full rerolls. Stuff usually reserved to Space Marine captains and canonesses and the like. It's very good with combat Acolytes, but more likely you're going to be using it with demo charge Acolytes or Neophytes. Being able to get full rerolls with demo charges that are normally hitting on a 5+ means you're going to be getting a lot more hits. And every 6 is a sustained hit if you're coming straight from deep strike. That is the detachment special rule. You want to have him with a big unit of 10 Acolytes. This is our one-off super bomb until the Acolytes die and then maybe come back. And then you can advance and throw the new demo charges because you get new demo charges because it's a whole new unit, rather than the same guys just getting back up the way it is with the banner. The demo charges, they are our anti-tank. If you want anti-infantry, perhaps a second Primus to go with some Neophytes. 20 Neophytes can put out a lot of shots with the sustained hits and ignores cover, and many other things you can stack on. Things like a perfect ambush. So this does still work, even after the points change to make it more expensive. I would include at least one Primus. Just be sure to put him with your biggest block of models. I don't want to see a squad of 5 Acolytes with a Primus. That isn't worth it. The Nexos is the other support character that's sort of similar officer style, military themed character alongside the Primus. We know from my video on the Games Workshop event guidelines FAQ that you can still use command point reroll, but the utility of the Nexus has gone way down since the start of 10th edition. If you missed the rules edit in September, again, there's a video on that. You can only use the 0 command point abilities on battle tactic stratagems. So we can't use tunnel crawlers, we can't return to the shadows, we can't be one with the darkness for free. We have command point reroll and cult ambush. So you have to weigh up, is cult ambush worth 60 points? In a smaller 1,000 point game, I don't think it is, but if you're getting up to 2,000 points and you're going to have multiple units coming from reserve in the same turn, when we're putting all of our eggs in that 1 second turn basket to do as much damage as possible, that's when you're going to want a Nexus. With the other ability to move a cult ambush marker up to 6 inches in either player's command phase, it can be a little bit extra useful, but once you learn where to place cult ambush markers so that they're far enough from the opponent, I find he's not that useful anymore. A very useful skill for newer players until you get used to how far away you should put the cult ambush marker. so I'll put him in B. B in no doubt that the Primus is better, but the Nexos still has good use. Well, I'm not comparing to Brood Brothers, because that would add in so many extra units that I would just be like, nope, doesn't work in Genestealer Cult, nope. If you think of Brood Brothers infantry units like the Cadians, the Infantry Squad, the Catachans, the Krieg Trench Warfare Specialists, and compare them to the Neophytes understandably, and thankfully, work much better in a Genestealer Cult army. Even if the Death Corps of Krieg that are converted to the cause can have some nice weapons like plasma guns and melter guns, they can't come up from reserve. And Neophytes can come back with the Cult Ambush, either on a 3+ or a 4+. None of the Brood Brothers can do that. Neophytes can come up from Deep Strike and be very good at killing light infantry. Ascension Day has a lot of bonuses to battle lines. Sustained hits when we arrive. With a perfect ambush, -1 AP. With an additional Ridge Runner, -2 AP. And now we're just clearing away any Imperial Guard with no save for them, or halving the save of a Space Marine. The Neophytes need some buffs to work, but Genestealer Cult have always been that way. We have terrible units on paper, but when we can get them done right, and we have all our army working in synergy to make a perfect ambush, no pun intended, no stratagem referenced, but yes, then the Neophytes are great at doing a job. Alternatively, stick them on an objective. That gives you command points. And I would have at least 2 units so that on average you are getting the 1 bonus command point you can gain other than the one you get at the start of the turn. Other Ascension Day bonuses have a lot of battle line focus. The Return to the Shadow stratagem lets you pick 1 unit or 2 battle line units, which are our Acolytes and our Neophytes. And although we cost more than any other kind of Horde infantry unit, because Genestealer Cult aren't truly feeling like a horde. The Mechanicus can outnumber us, the Imperial Guard can outnumber us and get more units back reliably, Orcs can outnumber us, Tyranids can outnumber us very easily, and 3 of their detachments bring back more models to their endless multitude units. Neophytes are expensive compared to them, but we get 4 special weapons. You can have 2 Webbers, 2 grenade launchers, and then don't underestimate 2 mining lasers or 2 seismic cannons per squad of 10. 4 seismic cannons getting 6 shots each, all hitting on 4s at AP -2, is not to be sniffed at, and all for 1 command point. They can do everything, and should be in every kind of list. And they're very irritating for the enemy to take down, because you get units back, and if you're on an objective, it's D3+3, and they should be on an objective to generate those command points. Very happy with Neophytes. And thankfully, as long as Games Workshop gets the core of the army, the Acolytes and the Neophytes right, we should be okay and not fall too far down the rankings. Despite the points increases. Aberrants. Aberrants can be very tough, and there are many ways to use them. They can function without an Abominant, because the -1 to wound is only for the very strong stuff, as they don't take that much damage from small arms anyway, las guns and auto guns needing a 6 to wound them, but they are certainly better with a character. You can put them in a transport and move them up the field to get out. You can infiltrate them with this enhancement and put that in an Abominant or a Biophagus. You can deep strike, rapid ingress them, and then they can hurt something. Or if you had to play defensively, they can sit on an objective and hold it pretty well. The 4+ feel no pain is the envy of Death Guard players. They can do a lot. They're very versatile. They have no ranged weapons though, and because they're not a battle line unit, they only come back on a 5+. So they won't work in just any list. If you were trying to focus on an infantry horde, or with the Ascension Day, a battle line focused army. You see how much the detachment affects which units are good. If we had a Twisted Helix style detachment that focused on Aberrants and, say, some hypothetical new unit that is a really big version of an Aberrant, then they could be much better. The low number of attacks, despite the high strength, also means they really struggle to take on hordes. But they are a good unit. The Abominant and the Biophagus are the characters that can go with them. Although I've said that the Aberrants can function without the Abominant, 3 attacks from Big Hammer Lady is not a lot, so she needs the sustained hits that she only gets when in a unit just to get 1 more. The Aberrants massively benefit from that with their mere 3 attacks each, and now the hulking bodyguard's extra toughness becomes very useful against dedicated anti-tank firepower, which is usually what is necessary to shift the Aberrants. They need each other. If either unit had their rules that function when they're alone, they would be auto-include. But along with the ability to infiltrate with the enhancement, this is a very strong pairing, the Aberrants and the Abominant. And the discussion of Aberrants plus Abominant together is one of my most popular videos. So the whole unit can hang out in the open, using one with the shadows to stay safe from long-range high-strength weaponry. Once the enemy comes in close, More fool them. Now they're in smashing range. Or we deep strike the whole lot to destroy whatever you hate the most. Strength 12 with d6 plus 1 damage means we have a literal man-portable las cannon. And the Abominant can come back like Celestine. You roll a dice, and on a 2+, it's Easter Sunday. She gets back up. That is extra tanky because she also returns with full wounds remaining. So if the enemy has only just managed to take her down, too bad. She's back up on full health. Very versatile in most lists, and is the only character that can come back because you don't roll the dice for Cult Ambush for characters. They don't return with units. And the Abominant doesn't have much of a role in a mechanized or a horde list or a hit and run list, but is another very good choice. I could just say B is for Biophagus, but let's do some analysis. I prefer the Big Hammer Lady for 15 points more, but the Biophagus, as well as being able to have the enhancement to let the whole unit infiltrate to get in there really quickly, the Biophagus can help with anti-infantry and anti-tank. While the Aberrants are wounding most infantry on a 2+ anyway, with the Alchemicus Familiar, it can be a good help once per game against toughness 5 things, or toughness 6 things, so Gravis Marines, and, you know, the entirety of the Orcs. Lethal hits are good against vehicles that we are usually otherwise wounding on a 5+, but that one-off 2+ anti-infantry is very useful. So we have good anti-infantry and viable anti-tank. I wouldn't say it's as viable as a Strength 12 hammer, but viable. The Biophagus's attacks are pretty useless, with an Injector Goat only getting 1 attack at Strength 2. I know it's anti-infantry, but it's also 0 AP. Once per game, he can have 4 attacks at D3 plus 3 damage. So against units that don't have a 2+ save, he can mess up a couple of tough infantry models himself. I would use this at the first opportunity. And the Biophagus can also be used to boost up some Metamorphs. When they make their sweep attack and have 5 attacks per model, lethal hits and anti-infantry 2+ on that is very nice. But at that point, we're trying to make a not great unit good, and we would also take away one of their abilities. We would lose Scout. The Biophagus could make an Acolyte unit that's combat focused with mining weapons a lot better, and can be paired up with the Primus in the same Acolyte squad, but we want the Primus to be focusing more on demolition charges than on combat. Thankfully, the Biophagus is versatile, either for the Aberrants or for other units to give them anti-tank or anti-infantry, so that is why I'm going to put him alongside the Abominant. And if you're feeling the Twisted Helix theme, he makes a very good warlord. Let's look at a couple of lone operatives. The Gunslinger lone operative. His weapons are very short-ranged. So short-ranged that after he shoots, he is basically within the lone operative distance so he can be shot back, making him, as an assassin, not the best choice. The Liberator auto-stubs do have precision and devastating wounds, but we have no way to boost the way the devastating wounds are working. There is no anti-character 4+. You're just firing a lot of shots, fishing for 6s, and then you will do 1 damage. There are no enhancements to boost the damage up to make it even worth trying to get those 6s. He can deploy 3 inches away, but that's only if there are Neophytes there, or Acolytes. He can be used more safely to perform actions on unthreatened objectives like the home objectives, just protecting the homestead, because he has the lone operative rule. However, the Reductus can do this as well, and doesn't cost many more points. It's only 10 more points to get the Reductus instead of the Kellermorph. The Reductus has good range on indirect firing bombs, and can use grenades for free, and has a demo charge, once per game, that hits on a 2+. So unless you were going very heavily into the theme of cowboys, and you'd taken the Mechanicus horse cowboys and converted them to be your jackal bikers, I'm going to say a no to the Kellermorph. But if the Kellermorph has a cowboy hat, the Reductus has a French beret and a hatred of occupation. You can keep the Reductus back on those home objectives, and then perform actions in a, say, fast or vehicle-heavy list, so she can complete actions pretty safely, although you'll probably want something like the little Cyclops demolition tank to come on from outflank and complete the secondary objective to have units in all 4 quarters. The Reductus can also do that, and still be in range with the indirect fire bombs that she's setting off. Being out of line of sight, and near an objective, you have a nice aura that's scary for enemies, as long as you don't roll a 1, and I'm on 50% in games of rolling a 1, then you can do some mortal wounds against whatever the enemy comes close to you with. And now that grenades are not a separate thing like they were in 9th edition, where you either throw grenades like with a keyword, the same as like a pistol or a heavy weapon keyword, we don't have that anymore, so you can throw your demolition charge and set off the remote explosives in the same turn. If the enemy got within your lone operative range of 12 inches, Hopefully you're out of line of sight so you can't be shot. That means you can then move up and be in range to throw the demolition charge. If you weren't, if you were like 13, 14 inches away, so you couldn't be shot because you're a lone operative, the demo charge is assault. So you could advance straight up there, throw the demolition charge, and although it's once per game, unlike the Acolytes hitting on a 5+, the Reductus is hitting on a 2+. That is really cool. And before you throw that, grenade stratagem for free. Obviously you don't want to charge, not with this profile, but as soon as the enemy moves closer, then your planted explosive can detonate. You're getting a lot of boom in a very compact frame. For 65 points, I wouldn't want to leave home without 1. Or 3. And while 2 of them are infiltrating up the board, waiting to set off explosives, and stopping enemies from deep striking within 9 inches, you can have another one close to your own deployment zone near an objective that's in no man's land, and then you have 3 people who can get close to the objectives and be performing secondary actions in the first turn. Definitely worth 10 points more than the Kellermorph, and definitely worth more than the Metamorphs, who are scouting up and in theory performing secondary actions on objectives. And Crusade missions, where you may be scoring in the first turn, being able to start and infiltrate on a no man's land objective, very, very useful. All of this, all viable for any kind of gameplay. And you can put on a French accent if you want. I'm not going to because I have standards. Allegedly. The Sanctus is another lone operative and a sniper that cannot really rival the snipers of other factions. But what the Sanctus can do is all of the actions that the Reductus was going to do, but at 15 points cheaper, which also makes him cheaper than the Kellermorph. With the sniper rifle, he has a very specific use against psychers, so if the meta becomes psychic characters are suddenly amazing, then we'll want him with the sniper rifle, otherwise the knife is better, because 6 attacks at anti-infantry 3+, and devastating wounds against whatever target you choose, and the ability to advance and charge, all of which tie it together to suggest that the knife is best, which it is. So you'll be able to inconvenience one enemy character before you die. So as long as the character that you're killing is worth at least 50 points, you've done the job with the Sanctus. And while you're waiting to make that charge, complete those secondary actions. But because of all of the different good abilities that the Reductus has, and again, not that many points between them, and the Reductus being able to put out mortal wounds just from an enemy getting close, I'm going to pop the Sanctus in B tier. He's alright, but there are units that do it better. If you run out of Reductus slots because you have all 3, the Sanctus is a good backup. For support characters for our Acolytes and our Neophytes, I have learnt not to underestimate fight first, and the Locus is the cheapest character that we can have. But if you're going with combat Acolytes and you mess up the charge, the enemy is probably going to be able to shoot you and take you down pretty easily because Acolytes are very expensive for a toughness 4 5+ save body with 1 wound. But if you're against a more combat focused army, being able to fight first against something that charges you is very nice. But the detachment rules we have aren't really combat focused. It's all coming up from underground. We do have coordinated attack, but that's 2 command points, and we're a very command point hungry faction. I've never found with Genestealer Cult there's, oh, I don't know what to spend my command points on, maybe some grenades? I have a plan for everything for at least the first 3 turns. The only bit that adapts is whether or not the Neophytes give us extra command points. So until we have a close combat focused detachment, the Locus is nice, and if you were going full horde with barely any characters, they are the cheapest character. But for this detachment, I would say that they're C tier. What about the Clamavus? We know how I feel about the Clamavus. In casual games, he's been rarely taken, but initially taken in 10th edition when a lot of tournament people feared a mirror match against the Genestealer Cult at the top tables. But now that the Genestealer Cult have slipped heavily in the competitive rankings, and other teleport factions like Demons and Grey Knights haven't shot up to the top, we aren't seeing the Clamavus as much competitively. If you're going to pick a character to be your warlord, the Clamavus is a good choice because this 12-inch aura of no deep strike means that he can be kept safe when the enemy needs to kill a warlord. And because no one can strike on top of him, he is also a good choice for Meticulous Planner because in all likelihood, he's going to be sat at the back on your home objective, away from the enemy, so he's unlikely to be killed before your opponent uses one kind of stratagem that they always use, such as Armor of Contempt. And you can make that, with Meticulous Planner, cost twice as much. Imperial Guard players stop being Genestealer Cult Hordy once we take away their reinforcements, and it now costs 3 command points. But aside from the Warlord trait, as a character, I think the Clamavus is very specific to the kind of enemy you're facing. It could be you take him and he's utterly useless, which is why I'm going to put him in C tier, but I'm not putting the Clamavus in the no category. even though he fundamentally is a DJ in a combat situation. The Magus has gone down a lot in ability since 9th edition took away their psychic powers. We have one, and that means that enemies are at -1 to hit, or if we roll a 6, lucky of lucky days, then we can turn off an enemy unit shooting. The trouble is getting the Magus close enough to whatever it is we want to turn off. It's a 12-inch range, once per game a 24-inch range, but 12-inch range means that we are in the danger zone for literally everything rapid firing and charging us. So it's one attempt to roll a 6. Against orc shooting, if you were against an orc shooting list, with looters, flashkits and grot tanks, then a -1 to hit can be an inconvenience. Or hitting some kind of super heavy tank and rolling a 6 to turn it off completely for one turn can be a pain. Or if your opponent has put so much combos and points and different abilities and things into one unit, something like aggressors with the fire discipline ability, then we can potentially mildly inconvenience them. But with this detachment, there's no enhancements that would make the Magus good. The ability is so minor and it targets one enemy unit rather than protecting one of your units. Sure, we could get lucky, but we can't rely on luck to win the revolution. The character that does protect a unit is the Acolyte Iconward, our bannerman. He gives a unit a 5+ feel no pain. Now on Neophytes or something that's just holding an objective, just being on the objective is enough for them to get D3+3 models back per turn. So the enemy's either going to wipe them out, or not wipe them out, in which case they're almost or totally back to full strength. You don't want to put him with a unit of Acolyte hybrids with demo charges because there's little point keeping them alive once they've thrown their demo charges. Then they're just some dudes with knives and tiny claws. If anything, it's better that they get destroyed, hope that they come back, and then you have some demo charges to use again. If you're having a more combat build for a unit of Acolytes, or in theory Metamorphs, so you would then lose the scout ability, he can keep them alive for longer. If you're just learning Genestealer Cult, this is a good training wheel, so you don't mess up immediately and just lose a whole unit, with the possibility of, yeah, it just doesn't come back. The other ability, Summon the Cult, is the other side of the training wheel. So if you have to remove a cult ambush marker because you placed it badly, now you can place it near him and it's going to be safe. And you have learned how to place ambush markers better. But once you've learned how to place those ambush markers, you don't need the Iconward. So it's a good unit for beginners only, not necessarily if you're going to a tournament when you should know the army well enough. The other drawback is, unlike other characters like the Locus, the Iconward can't be included with other characters like the Primus. So if you're wanting some powerful ball to do hitting damage and then resist damage as well, you can't. It's one or the other. But for his utility and usefulness for new players, especially in a casual learning environment, I'd put him in C tier. You may want him to start with. And maybe after playing with him for a few games, you get emotionally attached and you carry on playing with him even though you don't necessarily need him. It happens in RPGs. While we're thinking of abilities that let us remove tokens from the board and put them safely, we also have the Tectonic Fragdrill. Now a Legends only unit, and for 125 points, so more than twice an Iconward with a similar ability, but you have to be within 9 inches rather than within 12 inches. What can you do with the Tectonic Fragdrill? Because it can't move! It has a really powerful drill, but only hitting on a 6, so you're probably only going to get 1 hit, so nothing like the Abominant. It's tough, so you could stick it on an objective, your home objective, also have Neophytes on there to generate command points, and because of normal deep strike rules, you can't deploy within 9 inches of it, because it's still a unit. Almost all the fortifications that we're seeing are very expensive, because there hasn't been any additional rules given to fortifications for how they interact with things like enemy units, deep strike, close combat, shooting, target priority, or anything like that. So they tend to just be very overcosted. It's also a Legends unit, so I know that a lot of people are just going to see that and go, pfft, if I can't have it in tournament games, then I'm not going to play with it in any game. And also that means that the points are not going to be updated for it at any time during this edition. So even though we can take it in our normal games, it's really bad and really expensive, and literally a Clamavus and an Iconward are not only cheaper, they will do its job better. It's going in the no, but to make this suitable for tournament people, I'm just going to not even put it on the list. The Ridge Runner. It is a great bonus for this detachment. Its special ability, as long as you remember to fire this unit first, gives every other Genestealer Cult unit an extra AP against one target. And it doesn't have to be something that you fired all your guns at. you could fire just the twin heavy stubber at the thing you want to have as the target for the rest of your army, and then use the heavy mining laser or your heavy mortar to hit something else. With an extra command point, Neophyte shotguns are now -2 AP with sustained hits 1, hitting on a 3+. You can also have the Survey Ogre on the Ridge Runner to give you ignores cover. Now we have that already when we're coming from below, but it is useful in the denser tournament tables and when fighting monsters and the like, when even the smallest part of them being obscured can grant cover. It lets your demo charges hit true, and potentially at -4 AP, using the same Ridge Runner and stratagem as we were using on the Neophytes. It can scout, so it can do what the Metamorphs were going to do and be on an objective at the first turn and complete a secondary action if need be. You can keep it safe, and using the heavy mortar with indirect fire, that can still trigger the crossfire ability. But I am partial to a heavy mining laser myself. With all the synergies it gives your battle line units, with the indirect fire it gives you without having to turn to Brood Brothers, I think it's a great support vehicle. The only issue is it doesn't have the Cult Ambush, so you're not going to get it back if it's destroyed. I'm going with A tier. The truck. It helps you transport units around, and it has the fire support ability that we see on other vehicles like the Immolator. Reroll to wound can be nice if you're using a lot of low strength weapons like the strength 3 auto guns on the Neophytes, but this is all shooting phase only, not shooting and combat, and we don't have some kind of dedicated shooting unit that needs its strength boosting. Our low ballistic skill is what needs boosting, and you can't put things like Imperial Guard heavy weapons teams inside because no Brood Brothers can go inside. I would expect something like a bonus to hit stratagem in a detachment that's focused around vehicles, but that is the future and another detachment. The demo charge cache is nice, but it's very short range, and because it is blast, we can't use it against enemies that charge us through big guns never tire. There are no weapon options, so we're stuck with the autocannon. Reroll to wound on hand flamers from Metamorphs or Acolytes can be quite nice, because then we're auto-hitting with a reroll to wound, but just coming up from Deep Strike instead and hitting the target that we want is probably better. The truck's not doing anything particular that we aren't already getting from Deep Strike. We can keep a unit safe, we can keep a unit off the board, we can get a unit where we want around the board, but the Deep Strike does the same. You could spend 110 points to get closer to an enemy to charge with a combat unit, but if that was the plan, I would take the Nexos and then have the free command point reroll on the charge. I think it's a C tier unit for those who love vehicle lists and driving around with Neophytes who suddenly have access to demo charges. The Rock Grinder can transport a small unit, but it can't scout, even with Metamorphs, because although it's a transport, it's not a dedicated transport. This is where I would put a 5-man Acolyte demo team, but really I would put my 5-man Acolyte demo team in reserve so they can blow the enemy off a home objective or appear in the corner to complete a secondary objective. The Rock Grinder can have big guns, but the heavy mining laser can also be available on the Ridge Runner for much cheaper, nearly half the price. The Rock Grinder's a vehicle, but it doesn't have the toughness to charge up the board. It's a scary counterattack unit if you can keep it hidden because of its grinding ability and tank shock, but the strength 10 is going to struggle against tougher vehicles. It's still very nice. I'm not sure if it's B or C tier. It's definitely inferior to the Ridge Runner, but I think it's too many points for B tier. So C tier for the transport and crushing enthusiasts, but it needs a points drop. I mean, if it got a points drop, then it would be A tier, but that's the same for anything. If the Magus became 20 points, I would say, take 3, just come on from strategic reserves and complete secondary objectives and mildly inconvenience the enemy all over the board. In its current state, I would say C tier, and it's something to be enjoyed in the combat patrol. The speedy units, the Jackal Bikers. They have gone down in ability quite a lot since the start of the edition. I think it was in August that it was changed so that their demolition run is now once per battle round, not every time they complete a normal move, because people were stacking their ability, plus the Jackal Alphas, plus Prowling Adjutant, to go 3 times in a battle round to perform the demolition run. Now it is just the once. It is like a grenade stratagem, but the number of dice you roll are dependent on the number of models in the unit. And I would take them as a unit of 5 because although you can, in this one very specific formation, get a whole unit back and be within range of your Cult Ambush marker and the board edge because of the Outrider Gang ability, they're better in a unit of 5 so you don't have that difficulty. It's mainly the demolition run that you want to use them for, to get close to the enemy, blow them up, and then with the Jackal Alphas, move away. The Atlan Incinerator is nice. And if you did want to get into close combat, all of the Atlan Jackals can have power weapons. It's a nice little bit extra. They're a good unit and can put out some mortal wounds. Because of their speed and their scout, they can be harassing the enemy from turn 1, and with Prowling Adjutant can then pull back to safety. But if we're adding the Jackal Alphas and the Prowling Adjutant, I would want to go for a unit of 10 rather than a unit of 5, in which case you're probably not going to get them back in any useful position, unless you place your cult ambush marker right next to your own deployment zone, where it's safe near some Neophytes and possibly a Clamavus. I'll put them in B. So the only reason you would want the Jackal Alphas is to go with the Jackal Bikers, but we no longer have the multiple demolition run abilities, so it's focusing a lot on this Master Outrider. Now we also have target priority to make one unit that we target with the Cult Sniper Rifle is now letting every Genestealer Cult unit that hits that enemy unit reroll hit rolls of 1. Very nice when we have poor ballistic skill and can enhance a demolition explosion of 4 demolition charges of Acolytes coming up from reserves to be even betterer. But if you have a Primus in that unit, which you probably should, you are rerolling all hit rolls anyway. I've tried the Jackal Alphas by themselves, just to be providing that reroll hit roll of 1 and annoy things with the Cult Sniper. You have the speed to get the right angle for shots, but there's not amazing follow-up damage, not compared to dedicated sniper units like the Eliminators or the legendary Scout Snipers. On a unit of 5 Jackal Bikers, it's an expensive extra person at 60 more points, so you would only take the Alphas if you were having a large group of 10 Jackal Bikers, and then you wanted to hit the enemy and really get out the way, rather than charging in to finish off the remnants. It's a very specific use, so I will say C tier. That just leaves the Genestealers of the Genestealer Cult and the Big Daddy. Cheaper than Jackal Bikers for getting in there on the first turn and annoying and tying up the enemy. Pure Strain Genestealers having the ability to infiltrate and then advance and charge means you can pull off some nice turn 1 charges and tie up and annoy the enemy, leaving you free to claim objectives and complete secondary actions. And that's without the expense of picking a unit of, say, Aberrants with a Biophagus with a further 30 points for Inscrutable Cunning. And against the right enemy, Genestealers can either tear through them or tie them up. If the enemy has, oh, I've got these amazing combat weapons that are -3 AP, we don't care as Genestealers because we have a 5+ invulnerable save. So something like Necron Lichguard that have a few damage 1 attacks at high AP is the perfect prey for the Pure Strain Genestealers. And the Genestealers don't need to do that much damage, they just need to hold up the enemy. And with the Infiltrate ability, you can get onto objectives in the midboard immediately and complete any secondary actions that may be required. I have been finding Genestealers really useful. They cost the same points as Acolytes though, and while the Acolytes' claws are absolutely inferior to the Genestealer claws, the Acolytes get demo charges and mining weapons, meaning that the Acolytes have a better combat ability than the Genestealers do. And if the enemy has a lot of Horde units, like massive Imperial Guard blobs, Genestealers will tear through them without us having to throw demolition charges at them, which are better kept for the Imperial Guard vehicles. So I'll place them in B tier as a good unit, but there are units that do the job better, but those units may cost more points. Or just be Acolytes, which we've already mentioned, are really good in this detachment. And last of all is the Patriarch. We have a lot of flaws. We haven't got a range of psychic powers we can choose from, but that's the same for every army, apart from like Thousand Suns and their weird Cabal things. We can cause battle shock in the fight phase, which can potentially stop the enemy from using irritating stratagems like hard as nails to make our attacks much weaker, but it's not going to have lasting damage because the enemy is going to recover from their battle shock at the start of their turn. And that's when most things are scored, rather than at the end of the turn. Patriarch is an epic hero, so we can't have any enhancements on him. And 5 attacks just feels a little bit underpowered. He is rather cheap, and if you have a large pack of Genestealers that you want to have do damage, not just tie up the enemy, Devastating Wounds, with an extra 40 attacks from the Genestealers, can bring out a lot of 6s, but that requires good luck. And good luck does not win the revolution. Quite cheap, but in general, I would prefer an extra 5 Acolytes or an extra 5 Genestealers. So perhaps best kept on the throne, but not an unusable character. And very nice and thematic if you want to have the cult in all its resplendent glory rising up, as is the Ascension Day tradition. So that covers the Genestealer Cult tier list. We don't have that many units, and quite a lot of them are pretty average. But half our units can do some good work. But we are mainly relying on the battle line units for this detachment. The changes to the Cult Ambush have given us a knock, but mostly I'm okay with that. Getting infinite battle line units back did make the game drag on quite a while, even if you were losing. But I think we'll be waiting a while for any changes, and it could be another year before we get our codex. So this is going to be the state of play for quite some time. Even if there are points changes or ability changes, I don't think we'll see many more to the Genestealer Cult because Games Workshop has them at a pretty good win rate in tournaments, which is where their focus increasingly is and where they're able to see a lot of the balance being affected. If you want to know more about any particular unit, it is going to be in my Genestealer Cult playlist. So you can put that on in the background, or you could pick a specific video to follow up on one particular unit I've briefly mentioned here. My darlings and viewers, Ascension Day awaits.